Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to Knowledge Series, and today's session, let's have a discussion on the concept of Goods and Services Tax, in short GST. First and foremost, I'm pretty sure all of you are reading the newspapers, and if you're reading the newspapers very carefully, underline the term very carefully now. In the last couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure every day, at least once, you have come across this particular terminology GST in the newspaper. Many of you would be wondering as to what is the concept of GSTs. Many of you would be finding it difficult to understand the current affairs context related to that. Let's have a basics discussion related to this idea of GST today. Now, whenever you go to market and go to, let's say, a restaurant, go to watch a movie, purchase goods in the market, generally the shopkeeper or the one who is going to provide the services to you will give you a bill, and in the bill, along with the prices for the goods or services that you have consumed, they will add a tax which is called as Goods and Services Tax. For example, if you have purchased a certain food material, let's say anything that you have eaten in a restaurant, they will add 5% GST, and if you see the bill carefully, they will divide this particular 5% into two equal parts, 2.5%, 2.5%, CGST and SGST. What is this idea? First and foremost, understand the basic here. GST, it's a type of indirect tax. Done? This is a type of indirect tax. What is the basic idea of an indirect tax? Earlier we had VAT, we had service tax, we had state sales tax, etc. All these are nothing but the indirect taxes itself. The indirect taxes in nutshell are those types of taxes which can be transferred. The burden of taxation can be transferred. For example, government will impose this particular tax on me, but I will not pay this particular tax from my pocket. The burden of this particular tax would be transferred to you. You will purchase the goods, you will eat food, you will watch a movie, etc. You will end up paying these particular taxes to the government. These types of taxes are called as indirect taxes. So GST is a very important indirect tax reform which has been implemented by the government from the 1st July, 2017, and very recently we have completed 5 years of this particular GST. Now, what was the reason why Government of India proposed the concept of GST? First and foremost, understand this. The reason for the introduction of GST was that there was an issue of cascading effect and issue of multiple indirect taxes. What do you mean by this? Let's start with the first one here. Cascading effect simply means the tax would be imposed on an existing tax. I'll repeat the statement here. Cascading effect simply means a tax is imposed on an existing tax, right? What do you mean by this? Let's take a simple example. Imagine this is a marker. I want to manufacture the marker, so I'll purchase plastic. When I purchase plastic, I will pay certain indirect tax. I will use the plastic, manufacture the marker, and I'm willing to sell it to you. Now, when I'm selling the marker to you, again the government will impose a tax. So, when I decide the marker price, let's say just a hypothetical number, is 100 rupees, and government imposes a tax on this particular 100 rupees. Let's say hypothetically 10%. And within this particular 100 rupees, if there is already a component of tax that I've paid on the plastic, this is called as cascading effect, tax on tax. So earlier, when there was a sales tax regime, excise duty regime, there was this particular issue of cascading effect. Whenever the goods were moving from one tax regime to another tax regime, cascading effect took place. Whenever the goods were being moved from one state to another state, cascading effect took place. And to address that particular issue itself, government introduced VAT system, value added tax, that is specifically the state governments. But even when the state governments introduced the concept of VAT system, within the state the cascading effect was addressed. But whenever you moved the good from one state to another state, the cascading effect again happened. That is the precise reason Government of India now stated, okay, in that case there is no need to have multiple these types of taxes. What we will do is, we will have only one type of a tax, indirect tax, where we'll simply subsume all the indirect taxes like this. And that concept in a nutshell is nothing but GST. Second, earlier, central government had multiple indirect taxes. I repeat, central government had multiple indirect taxes. The states also had multiple indirect taxes. And the complexity was much more because, please understand this, central government had an indirect tax and the rate was fixed across all the states. For example, imagine on a particular service, Government of India will impose a service tax of 15%. So when this particular service is consumed across India, doesn't matter which state, the service tax would remain same 15%. Whereas when the state governments are concerned, or what about the state governments, the problem was that the tax rate on a particular good varied from one state government to another state government. For example, this marker, earlier if it was sold in, let's say, state of Bihar, let's say the tax rate was 12%. If the same marker is sold in the state of Kerala, it could be 15%. It could be 18% in West Bengal. If it is sold in, let's say, another state such as Rajasthan, it could be 21%. So from one state to another state, the tax rates varied. So it was very complex system earlier. So Government of India basically looked at this and said, let's have a uniform taxation now. For example, now under GST, understand this, if this marker is sold in any of the state, and let's say hypothetically the marker attracts 18% GST, irrespective of which state the marker will be sold, GST rate shall remain same, that is 18%. So multiple indirect taxes were there, which were making it very difficult to conduct business, etc. So Government of India said, let me make it easier now. Third, to widen the tax base and increase government revenues. There is a lot of tax evasion that was happening earlier. I used to sell the goods, I did not give you the proper receipt, printed bill will not be given. So government finds it very difficult to find out how many goods and services, or what is the value of goods and services that I have sold. Very difficult to account for the revenue and collect taxes. Right? So there was a huge amount of tax evasion that was taking place earlier. And to widen the tax base also, Government of India has introduced the concept of GST. Now, what do you mean by the term tax base here? Tax base basically refers to any asset, income, etc. on which government can impose and collect the taxes. Is it okay? Any type of asset, income or revenue on which government can impose and collect the taxes. That is called as a tax base. Under the GST, understand this, with the implementation of GST, number of taxpayers have increased. And when the number of taxpayers increases, automatically the amount of revenue collection is also expected to increase. The transportation cost were a problem earlier. Understand the logic here. One issue that is plaguing the exports, or let's say even the manufacturing sector in India, is the cost of transportation. Because imagine you manufacture this marker at one place, you want to sell it in another place across, let's say, 5 states, across 6 states, across, let's say, 500 kilometers like this. You will have to move the good, you will have to transport the good, and the cost of transportation obviously will add to the market prices. Now the problem earlier was, whenever you move the goods from one state to another state, there is a concept of check post. And because there is a check post system, it became very difficult for the goods to be moved very easily from one state to another state. The time that was taken for transportation increased, consumption of fuels increased, cost of transportation increases, and the market prices would increase. Now under the GST, right, under GST what will change? We will understand in some time. So these are some of the reasons why Government of India proposed the concept of GST, Goods and Services Tax. Now what are the features of GST? What are the important points regarding GST? One, it will be streamlining or subsuming all the indirect taxes, thereby creating one nation, one indirect tax. I'll repeat the statement here. One of the very important features of GST is what? It will subsume all the indirect taxes to create one nation, one tax or one indirect tax. And when I am saying it will subsume all of these particular indirect taxes, right now the situation is that all the indirect taxes are yet to be subsumed under GST. I can understand this. All the indirect taxes are yet to be subsumed. For example, the tax on electricity, even today, right, it is not under the GST. The tax on alcohol for human consumption, not under GST. The government is yet to decide, or the GST Council is yet to decide on what date or from which dates the taxes or the GST rates on the fuels would be announced, etc. So, we have to achieve this particular concept of one nation, one indirect tax. Second, in order to implement GST or introduce GST, Government of India had to change or amend the constitution. Had to change a provision or had to amend the constitution. Why? Simply understand the logic here. Earlier, right, the Constitution of India divided the taxation power between the center as well as the states. Now, the problem is when you design a tax system which will subsume, which will take up the indirect taxes at the central level as well as the state level, first you need to amend the constitution. I will repeat the statement. You are taking away the indirect tax powers from the center as well as the states, and if you don't change the constitution, it simply means you are violating the provisions of the constitution. That is a precise reason Government of India introduced a constitutional amendment bill, got it passed in the parliament, more than half of the states also passed it, then the GST was actually implemented. Another very important point regarding GST is setting up of GST Council. First and foremost, GST Council is a constitutional body which has been set up under Article 279A of Indian Constitution. I will repeat, GST Council, it's a constitutional body which has been set up under Article 279A of Indian Constitution. Now, the GST Council will have a composition from center as well as the states. I repeat, the composition of the council is that there will be representation from the center as well as the states, plus even the union territories which have legislative bodies, which have legislative assemblies will also be represented here. From the center, the most important person or the personnel will be the finance minister, and from the states it will be the revenue ministers or finance ministers of respective state governments. And this particular GST Council will be chaired by, or the chairperson of the GST Council will be Union Finance Minister. Remember this, the chairperson of the GST Council is Union Finance Minister, and there is also proposition or there is also provision to set up the, right, the vice chairperson, but so far there has been no election which has been conducted for the vice chairperson under the GST Council. Apart from this, understand the logic here, apart from this, what is the importance of GST Council? The GST Council is the body which will take all the decisions regarding GST. For example, what kind of goods and services will be brought under GST, that will be decided by the council. Once they are brought under GST, what will be the rate of GST applicable? What will be exempted? How the rates have to be moved? How a product or a service has to be taken out of GST? All of these particular decisions are taken by the GST Council. And whenever you talk about GST Council decision making, please understand this. The decision of the GST Council has to be taken by at least 75% of majority of the votes of present and vote. Right? Understand the statement here. The decision which has to be taken by the GST Council, if there is a voting process, the decision has to be taken with the majority of at least 75% of the people, or let's say 75% of the present and votes. And the voting decision or voting division generally is divided and the formula is fixed. 1/3 of the voting rights have been given to the central government, that is 33.3333% till infinity, and 2/3 of the voting right have been equally distributed amongst the states. Remember this, as well as the union territories. So 1/3 of the voting rights have been given to the center and 2/3 of the voting right have been given to states or divided equally amongst all the state governments like this, or plus union territories which are present in the GST Council. Next, in India we follow a model called as a dual GST. What do you mean by dual GST? Understand this very carefully. Whenever you are talking about GST, you will quote rates in the form of 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. These are the rates or these are the slabs. Apart from this, we have 0%, 1%, etc. But these are the most important slabs or the rates under GST. If you take any of these particular rates, the rate of 5% can be divided equally into 2.5%. What about 12%? It can be equally divided into 6%. 18% can be divided equally into 9%. And same thing for 28%, equally 14% and 14% like this. So whatever is the GST rate, right, will be divided into two equal parts. One part will be given to the central government, which is called as central GST, and the other part is given to the state, which is called as SGST. And remember this SGST will go to the state where the consumption happens. I repeat, this SGST will go to the state government where the consumption of the good actually happens. Meaning what? Imagine, just a hypothetical example, imagine on the sale of this particular pen, the GST collected is, let's say, 20 rupees. So out of that particular 20 rupees, 10 rupee anyways will go to the central government, CGST, and the remaining 10 rupees will be given to the state government where the consumption, where the good, that is this marker or pen, has been purchased by the customer. That is a concept of destination based tax, and in case of India, remember this, GST is having a destination based model itself. And apart from this, there is also a concept of integrated GST. Idea of integrated GST is very simple. Whenever the good will move from one state to another state, understand this, whenever interstate trade and commerce is conducted, we use the term integrated GST or IGST. But please understand, in terms of rates, in terms of the GST rate applicable on the marker, whether it is sold within the state, across the state border, doesn't matter, the rate remains the same. The GST rate remains the same. If it is produced and consumed within one state, let's say GST is 18%, we'll simply say GST there. If it is produced in one state, moves across the border, consumed in the second state, I will use the term IGST, but it still remains 18%. Why two different names? Simple logic is, if I say GST, production consumption has happened in one state. If I say IGST, production consumption has happened across the state lines. Apart from this, there are also certain goods or services which are exempted. For example, alcoholic liquor for human consumption, electricity, these are as of now exempted from the GST. The GST Council will also decide when and from which date the GST rates would be notified on fuel products such as ATF, petrol, diesel, etc. And finally, for the states which would be incurring revenue losses for a period of 5 years, Government of India had announced the compensation 100% of the revenue loss for a period of 5 years. That is, once the GST is implemented, imagine I am the state government, I am collecting lesser amount of GST revenues. In that case, right, there is a formula which will be used to calculate the revenues, and the compensation will be paid to the state governments which are losing out revenues under the GST. Right? So these are certain very important features of GST. Now if you make a comparison between the old taxation structure and the new taxation structure, these are the very important differences. First one, earlier the goods as well as services were taxed at different rates. They were treated differently. But under the GST, there is no differentiation. The goods as well as services will be covered under only one type of a taxation, that is GST. Second, earlier different state governments had different rates of taxation. Now doesn't matter, there is a uniform rate of taxation. National market is possible now. National market is not possible earlier. National market simply means uniform rate of taxation, irrespective of the state, irrespective of part of India, rate of GST shall remain same. Taxation rate might remains same. That is called as national market, which is possible now. Earlier it was a tax on production. For example, central sales tax was a tax on production. Now it is a destination based tax, that is the state where the consumption of the good happens, that state will get the GST, that is SGST component. Earlier there was an issue of cascading effect, now there will be no issue of cascading effect. So what are the benefits of GST? Right, having looked at the structure, features, etc. What are the benefits of GST? One nation, one taxation is possible now. Having said so, again remember this, we are yet to achieve that. Over a period of time, we will subsume and achieve the concept of one nation, one tax. Second, cascading effect would be eliminated. It will provide benefit to various sectors such as manufacturing, such as a logistics sector, etc. For example, sir, how it will provide benefit? Imagine you are a manufacturer. You are a manufacturer of this particular marker. I'll give you two situations. You tell me which one is better. One situation, in every state, you will have to keep on providing documentation. You will have to file returns. You will have to be registered in every state. You will have to keep on providing, or let's say providing the information to the government monthly in every state. And the rates of taxation changes from one state to another state. Second situation, throughout India, only one type of a tax rate. You will have to submit document to only one authority. You will have to submit data monthly to only one authority. Which of the two situations would you prefer? If you are a rational person, you will say obviously sir, second one, right? We are not idiots, we will choose the second option. Absolutely correct. So that is how the GST will provide benefit to manufacturing sector by eliminating cascading effect, by making it much easier to get registered, file the returns, get the refunds, etc. It will also promote conducting business or ease of doing business in India. And finally, whatever tax evasion was there earlier, like I said you, or like I told you some time ago, the informal bills or kacha bills were actually issued in the market. Now under GST, the concept of informal billing or kacha billing has been eliminated. Government will conduct, let's say, inspections at various places. The cascading effect has been addressed. The person who wants to get the input tax credit has to file the receipts, etc. Because of all of this, the tax evasion under this particular issue of the earlier taxation system has been addressed. Having said so, is the GST structure that we have, is it the best structure? Are there any issues related to the GST we have now? Right, because please understand there are two types of arguments here. One, GST the government says is a good and simple tax, and the opposition says it is not good, it is not simple, it is neither good, it is not simple, or there is one more term called as a Gabbar Singh tax. So what are the concerns? First and foremost, the compliance burden has actually increased. What do you mean by compliance burden? Whenever government introduces certain policies, certain actions are taken, certain measures are taken by the government, because of that, the expenditure of the companies will increase. Let me take a very simple example so that you understand. Imagine you are running a company, government now says, in your company, you will have to install sanitizers at every place like this. At least 10 sanitizers you will have to install. So before pandemic, this was not a compulsion on you people. Right? As a manufacturer, there is no compulsion. Now because of the pandemic, because the government has told you to do so, you will have to install sanitizers. Once you install sanitizers, you will incur extra expenditure. Your expenditures will now increase. So with the introduction of GST, because the companies will have to print the receipts now, keep a record of all the receipts, they will have to have machinery to file the returns, etc. The compliance burden has actually increased. We are having multiple tax rates under GST. For example, I told you earlier 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. These are the most important ones. Not all the ones, but most important ones. But if you have these particular tariffs, it is not one nation, one tax. It is multiple tariffs, multiple rates are there. So you need to rationalize, reduce the number of tax rates further, which Government of India says we will do it in the coming days. Third, there is a lot of concern regarding the state governments with respect to revenues, because it was expected that the GST would get stabilized by now, but because of pandemic, because of slowdown, recession, etc., the revenues for the states are a concern even today, right? So that is also a concern regarding the revenue protection of the states. And finally, there is a list of exempted goods and services which have to be brought under GST so that we will be able to achieve the concept of one nation, one indirect tax. Because right now we have GST, we parallelly also have other types of goods and services on which different types of taxes are being imposed by the center as well as the state government. So if I continue the same, it is going to defeat the whole purpose of one nation, one tax. So we need to subsume, merge all of them into the concept of GST. So these are some of the very important concerns, or let's say the way forward that the government of India has to ensure to make the GST a good and simple tax, and the tax which will provide a lot of benefits to the whole economy as such. So these are the various important aspects related to GST. Let me take up some of the questions from your side. Why petrol and diesel are excluded from GST? Answer is very simple. The center as well as the states earn huge amount of revenues by imposing taxes individually on petrol and diesel, or in simple terms fuels, because even aviation turbine fuel, it is not under GST now, or there is no GST on this. So the argument of the state governments, even the central government argues the same thing, but most importantly states, they say that we are able to generate huge amount of revenues by imposing any rate of taxation on these particular fuels. But if you bring these particular fuels under GST, the maximum rate you are having right now is 28%. Maximum rate is 28%. But right now if you calculate how much is the tax imposed by the center and states on the fuels, that is very, very high rate as such. So if you bring it under GST, what should be the rate? If you have maximum 28% and if you bring it under 28%, then the center as well as states would be losing lot of revenues. That is the reason alcohol, right, that is used for human consumption, or for that matter fuels, we are yet to notify GST on this. Where the concept of GST originated, right, there are many countries which have implemented GST. In fact, there are more than 150 countries which have implemented GST as a concept. India is one of the very late entrants as such. Sir, is the GST good for our country? Definitely yes. If you look at the benefits that the GST has provided to us, to logistics sector, to industries, to manufacturing, to exports, to customers, there are a lot of benefits. Having said so, now some of you look at the concern and say, sir, but there are concerns. Please understand this, whenever these kind of questions are asked in the UPSC, always try to end it on a positive note. In this case, what can be a positive note? There is no country in the world which has implemented GST on a scale that India is actually implementing. Have you understand this? There is no country in the world which has implemented GST on a scale that India is actually implementing. Right? That is the precise reason. Initially, there will be certain issues. Over a period of time, these particular issues would be addressed by the government measures or government policies. That should be the way you are going to conclude these kind of questions. What is the difference between SGST and IGST? SGST is a component of GST, right? Have a look at this. When I say GST, two components, CGST and SGST. And when I say IGST, again it can be broken down into two components, CGST and IGST. But why are we using two terms here, GST and IGST? Simple. If the production consumption happens in one state, that is GST. If the production happens in one state, consumption happens in another state, that is IGST. To differentiate, to notify which state would get the GST component, we generally use the concept of IGST. Cascading effect, right? The concept of cascading effect is simple here. There is a price, let's say the price of the product is 100, but out of 100 rupees, there is a tax of already 10 rupees. Out of 100, there is a tax of 10. Now on this, again I will implement 10% tax, which means I am imposing tax on tax. So whenever tax is imposed on an existing tax, it is called as cascading effect. Done? Right, so these are some of the questions, and this is the concept of GST. If you like the initiative, please hit the like button, provide your valuable comments in the section below. And if you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S Exam Prep IS, kindly do. Thank you. Have a great day.